So now we're gonna tackle about the one of the external factors that the business may face throughout their journey, and that is the political risk. Almost all of the business, local or international, face this kind of risk, and it plays an essential role in shaping the threats and opportunities of the business. So, for example of this is on December 2016, the Century Pacific Foods Incorporated has expanded their distribution in of their products in China. That means that their distribution in China is is under the control or supervision of the Chinese government, which affects their target performance and expansion in the mainland of China. So, according to the definition of Zonis and Wilkin, political risk is the uncertainty that stems in whole or in part from the exercise of power by governmental actors and the actions of non-governmental groups. So, most of the time, especially here in the Philippines, businesses have its political color that affects their performance, their advancement in the market, and in 2020, the ABS-CBN Corporation has I didn't get the franchise for the operation for the year 2020 and for the next 5 years. That means that they faced a political risk that they are unable or took them a long time to assess, to manage, and to overcome. And also, political risk can be manifested through the government inaction or its direct action. An action could be the failure of issuing permits to the business or the failure to enforce the legal supervisions in the business. Direct actions of the government could also be the tax laws, the tariffs, or the quotas that the business have to follow. So political risk has two scopes, that is the macro political risk and the micro political risk. Now let's tackle about the macro political risk. So these potentially affect all the business in the country. Threats may arise from dramatic actions such as terrorism, civil war, coup d'etat, or the military insurgents. Macro political risk can often sometimes be called country specific risk. That is because the risk might occur in the country and might affect all the business inside the country. So before international firms establish a business, like for example in a certain country, for example here in the Philippines, they assess at the macro level the political risk here in the Philippines. Like for example, the turmoil, the political stability, the historical stability, the economic stability, and the cultural and religious activities here in the Philippines. So now here we have the micro political risk. This risk can only affect the specific firms or certain types of industries or types of ventures. Such risk may take in the form of new regulations or taxations imposed on certain types of business in the country. Like for example, here in the Philippines, we have the excise tax for cigars and the alcohol. That is that is called the micro political risk. It is also sometimes called the firm-specific risk. That is because the risk is limited only to a certain type of business. So political risk often occurs in a certain country. Like for example, here in the Philippines, the political risk are only are only experienced that I from the business here in the Philippines that operates here in the Philippines. But however, according to Ascroben in 1997, he points out that the new political risk is likely to involve multiple companies with and multiple governments where business partners are caught between 3, 4, or 5 governments with different policy objectives and economic philosophies. That is because, especially we are now in 21st century, most business wants to expand, wants to go global, wants to go international for them to gain profit, for them to gain authority and control in a certain industry. And also, there are companies that are government owned or government controlled that are for example, the the electricity or the petroleum or the oil or the energy firms, they are mostly controlled by the government. So now we have the table of the summary of the macro political, micro political risk and its impact. Here, the government, in the macro political level, we have the recession, the inflation or hyperinflation, the military insurgents, coup d'etat, the civil wars, and other politically motivated violence. So here we have these risks can affect all business in the country. Its impact could be loss of sales, higher operational costs, destruction of property, disruption of to production, increased security costs, lower productivity, and difficult staff retention. And here in the micro political level, we have the risk of industry-specific taxation. That can be the excise tax if you are here in the Philippines, the tariffs and quotas, the politically motivated violence against petrochemical or pharmaceutical industry, and its effect or impact could be lower after-tax profits, volumes, disruptions or to production or and disruptions to the research and development.
Benefits of political risk management. So first, provides a proactive, systematic, and methodical approach to the evaluation of alternative investment opportunities based on analysis of different geographical markets set in different political contexts. So, proactive approach, which focuses on eliminating problems before they have a chance to appear or occur, and methodical approach, which companies able to learn by a step-by-step procedures. So next is provide another tool with which to examine return on investment. So this is to measure the probability of gaining a return from an investment. Also, to know whether they have gained or lost from an investment. The next is support more rational decision taking between competing choices. So this is a concrete mitigation actions to reduce investment exposure. So having a diverse portfolio of investment or investing in the variety of different assets and industries. Also know the goals that you want from your investments. So next is contributes to a more holistic approach to risk management. Organization identifies all the threats and risks of their investment and managing all those risks and threats. So now we have the implementation of political risk management. So first, developing intelligence on the market the business wishes to penetrate. So one key factors of business growth is decision making or effective decisions, development plans, and also having a market strategies. So next is having a clear understanding of the historical and social environment of the country in which investment is planned. So investing in a foreign country, one must know the or understand the historical and social environment of the country, as this can also affect the business. Next is understanding the support that can be obtained from UK government agents. So next is developing and understanding the sources of political risk. So the sources of the political risk is like the government that protects the consumers and also influence the business community in a country. So lastly, building a political risk management capabilities. So monitoring the business system or managing the political risk that would bring expected return of gains.
So, hello. So, this is the part of my report. Part of my report is about the Zonas and Vulcan political risk framework. So, this framework is about the key to developing a proactive and broadly focused political risk management strategy that is to adopt a comprehensive and systematic view of factors driving political diba? Risks, I mean. So it's considered also that will allow a business to identify the exact position of problems. So this this framework is categorized into three. Is the external drivers. The second one is the interaction drivers. And the last one is the internal drivers. So let's proceed to the first one. So let's make it quick, diba? So external drivers, it is external drivers of political risks. So it's also subdivided into several categories as given in this book. So the classic drivers and the poor public safety. So this one, the classic drivers are the incidents of political instability is like dili siya balance something. Like the riots and coups, like kanang naga-protest for the government like that, for the wages and the discount something, diba? And the poor public policy, when we talk about that, it's like the like dili siya like abrupt changes like the currency crisis, like katong nahitabo sa ninggamay ang dollar na currency exchange rate sa US and Philippines. Dugay nalipay na ning taas ang rate sa Philippines, Philippine peso, but sa at the same time na sad pud ang uban kay ang US nga rate is ning gamay. So what if pag magpadala sila atong silang ang OFW nga kuan is ning gamay siya, diba? Like that. So the next one is the interaction drivers. So split into categories involved, diba? Wait. So interaction drivers is na categorized po siya into three parts, which is the unions, the NGOs, and shareholders. So in host country governments, local governments, and host country, with the host country and with regulators. So if daw ang relationship sa those kuan like the company and the country na turn into sour or like dili na maayo ilang pag connection nila something, the political risk level will increase. Diyan naman enter ang pagkuan na dili na maapektuhan ang company tungod ana lang na rason, di ba? So katong una na kuan na categorize is the unions. So it is most common reasons for unwanted host government intervention is the labor issues. So ako nasayran na din ano sa in here in our city, locally, is da katong Kilusang Mayo 1. Have you heard about that? It's about every May 1 lang yun sila protest or maybe kanang nagreklamo lang about labor issues, kanang gamay ang wage na ginahatag. Nagreklamo sila last year. Akong heard lang na ako karon nga year 2020 wala din sa nalungan kan so na pag-protest sa plaza dahil COVID. So atong last year 2019 Kalusang Mayo 1 is nagkuan sila og wage hike. Gusto sila nag-protest sila. So daghan po nagreklamo ng mga company na lisod kay increase pero ilang demand is like 5 pesos. So mauto na daghay daghan po nag-protest nga company na lisod kay increase ang mga wage or salaries sa ilang employees. So in this book, so several academic studies have found that companies now well organized large labor forces experience high levels of political risks, di ba? Kay katong mostly nagreklamo gid adto kay kanang sa mga manufacturing company like kanang hago daw kaayo pero ilang sweldo kay gamay lang ana something or like that, or naiwan po na wala gi kuan ang ilang mga overtime like that, diba? So the next one is the NGOs, or the non-government organization. So it is if involved daw ang NGO sa company's values and risk and investment proceeds or the project itself, ay maka-affect po na siya sa company, like sa ilang global reputation as well as the consumer behavior. So the next one, the last part is last part sa interaction drivers is the shareholders. So, anong nakakaano rin siya na kasi sa political risks? I mean, yes, that. I don't know. So, when shareholders daw obtain information about foreign political events from the media, they are likely to respond to negative events by hammering the company's share price. Like, for example, they have heard na, hala, ang kuan, like, oil something, itong guys sa Saudi, like that, na ning mubo ang ilang, taas ang kuan. If nagataas na siya, mataas pud ang kuan sa mga company cost like that, tanan. So, if madunggan as a shareholders, like they're most likely to withdraw their shares or investment from the company, which may cost sa political risk, diba? So, muna siya. And the last part is the internal drivers of Zoni's and Vulcan framework. So it is divided into 5 categories again. Yeah. So the first one is the organization. So this one, the problems in this area can have a profound effects on a company's ability to deal successfully with political risks. So ang ani is it is inside the organization which affects or that creates high level of political risk. So like the management, something, di siya nag-start para sa ilang kito sa political risks. So the second one is the information. So information problems have been so difficult, diba, to overcome, and one typical problem is that the internally produced risk assessment were too lengthy and abstract to be useful. So it's like pang mga na information, like di nila kanila gina-read and dili nila comprehend, so murag useless na siya, diba? So murag high risk po na siya for political something na wala siya nakuha na specific, and when correct manager did not believe them and failed sa ilang katong mga recommendations, pwede lagi basa talong, di ba? Murag, okay. So the third one is the policy. So policy related risk include problems with managers failing to obey risk management policies or problems, or the absence of incompleteness of policies. So sa wala palang daan nila, or yes, sa employees or sa managers pag obey sa policies, so more high level of political risk yun siya, kay unsa man yung pagkuan kung wala din mo ikuan di follow tong policy sa company. What if sa outside na, di ba, kung mo intervene sa government, murag di siya mao. So the third one is the techniques. So risk relating to the use of specific risk management techniques arise when companies select the wrong type of risk management strategy. So it's like namali mo kuan ka ng pag-assess para ma-avoid avoid ba, no? Avoid ang risk or ma-lessen ang risk. So namali mo kuan. So unsa man yung pagkuan mo, taas na naman ang levels of political risk. More siya imbes imong i-lessen ning taas na naman siya. So the last one is the human capital risks. So it includes problem about staffs, like employees, the workers that are not qualified to deal with political problems. It is when Project March attempts to avoid dealing with the host government, like stick to business only. Fail to cultivate positive relationship, like kalaganing pamilabot diha ay mga apil-apil. So mura ginahinder ninyo inyong ilang kuan. So nag-arise na siya into political risk. So I think that's all about the Zonis and Vulcan framework. Okay, thank you.
Contracts. Companies who contract with either foreign governments or private entities located abroad for either the purchase or supply of goods or services often face a number of political risks that threatens the profitability of the transaction, and the events to forestall the fulfillment of a contract can occur before or after shipment or delivery of the contracted goods and before, during, or after completion of the contracted services. So, meaning, ang kadtong companies nga naay contract with foreign governments or private entities often encounters political risk. And kani nga political risk threatens the financial benefit of the transaction. Events nga makaprevent or obstruct the fulfillment of a contract can occur before or after shipment or delivery. And this is what we call the contract frustration. Now, in the next slide, we have the contract frustration prior or after sa shipment or delivery of goods. So, contract frustration. Ano sa maning contract frustration? Well, contract frustration is an event or an unexpected occurrence that happens or nga nahitabo pag ang kontrata is beyond na sa control sa parties nga nag-sign o render sa contract. It could either be nga impossible or immoral na siya ma-achieve physically or commercially, or kaya ang contract performance kay different siya sa kadtong intended ninyo nga kasabutan. So, that is a contract frustration. And the contract frustration prior sa shipment or delivery of goods could be nga first, na outbreak of a new war or civil war preventing the contract from being completed. Second is na ay cancellation sa contract by the other parties agreement with the parties sa government entity. Third, na ay cancellation of legally granted or export licenses or implementation of laws preventing import or export of goods. So, unsa maning import or export license? This open doors for frequent international trade. Useful ni siya, magamit ni siya regularly sa pag-import of goods for personal use or kaya mag-require kag raw materials or products sa other countries for business purposes. So, an import or export license allows you to import or export goods from or to any country. Mao ni siya ang mga events nga mahitabo prior sa shipment or delivery of goods sa inyong kontrata. Next, we have the contract frustration after shipment or delivery of goods. First, pwede nga, failure of the government foreign exchange authority to transfer the transaction amount in the contract currency to the exporter, although the private local buyer has deposited the agreed upon payment in equivalent local currency with the foreign exchange authority. Meaning, wala na tuman, wala ni meet sa agreed nga exchange sa currency. Next is the payment default by a buyer that is a government entity. Default meaning failure to repay a debt including interest or principal on a loan or security. Pwede siya ma-occur pag ang borrower kay or ang katong isa ka party sa company kay unable siya to make timely payments, o pwede siya nga misses payments or avoid or stops making payments. Muna siya ang meaning sa payment default by a buyer that is a government entity. Third, we have where contract disputes have arisen, a government buyer or bank do not honor an arbitration judgment in favor of the exporter in accordance with the arbitration procedure outlined in the transaction contract. Meaning, na ay contract dispute Mahitabo siya pag ang isa ka party nga involved sa contract is na disagreement sa ilahang contract regarding sa terms or definitions nga na dito. So, these are the events nga pwede mahitabo prior or after sa shipment or delivery of goods sa contract nga inyohang gi-agree. So, next we have transition economies of Europe. What is transition economies? Transition economy is an economy that is transitioning from a centrally planned economy to a market economy. And we have also here the term Marx to the market. So, pasabot ana. Marx is a person. He is Karl Marx. He is a philosopher and an economist who believed in the labor theory of value to explain the relative differences in market prices. So he is a critic in the political economy. The understanding of the market was central to his analysis of the capitalist mode of production, or a critic of capitalism as a whole. Capitalism. Saan na po din capitalism? Well, capitalism is an economic and political system in which ang trade and industry sa isa ka country kay controlled by a private owner for profit rather than by the state. And market, on the other hand, is the domain of democracy and equality, in which any economic contribution to society is judged and rewarded without fear or favor on the grounds of its social merit. So, since 1989, about 28 independent states of the Central and Eastern Europe have embarked on the transition from a Marx to the market transition. Transition to market has been mixed due to the enormity and complexity of turning a centrally planned economy into a market economy. Transition economies seek to make foreign direct investment from businesses sa advanced nga market economies to make it attractive. Ang lahang motivation ani kay naggikan sa desire to secure the transfer of technology and management techniques as well as capital. The appeal to invest in transition economies may be strong due to the emerging markets, but such investments are prone to political risk. It is therefore necessary to understand both the starting point and the evolutionary path that the transition economies are traveling. So, in the next slide, we have here the term communism. What is communism? Communism is a political theory derived from Karl Marx, advocating class war and leading to a society in which tenant property is publicly owned and each person works and is paid according to their abilities and of their needs. Now, communism guaranteed full employment and a reasonable standard of living for its citizens, but there were no rewards for managers in SOEs. SOE means state-owned enterprises. So, meaning, wala daw rewards ang managers to produce the output efficiencies. Planned targets were expressed in volume or weight, with little reference to quality. So, mas giatagan nila importansya ang output or ang volume sa output rather than sa quality. So, workers were not individually incentivized. As stated here, incentives and penalties were weakly linked to performance and tended to encourage just satisfying output targets. So, in a market economy, high prices indicate a shortage which is addressed by competition. In a planned economy, scarce resources are indicated by queues. Western businesses therefore have invested in business development in emerging markets. In summary, planned economies kay nagsuffer sila og daghan or numerous problems and inefficiencies that aside for example shortages sa consumer goods, inflation tungod sa underpricing sa scarce goods and services, hidden unemployment due to overmanning. So, meaning overmanning. Overmanning means it is a situation in which a company, industry, or etc. has more workers than are needed. In synonym, it is also known as overstaffing. Also, and the guarantee of full employment and the soft budget constraints caused by stringent or strict financial control of the state-owned enterprises or SOE. So, next we have here the key issues. Key issues, pag may key issues, these are the important topic or problem for debates and discussion. The key issues here are the uncertainty over fiscal policies, the worker mentality, the productivity rates, the instability in the price of inputs, the inflation, the poor infrastructure, and the low domestic demand.
So, UK government fiscal policy. The UK government influences the economy to accomplish its four main aims, which are the full employment, favorable balance of payments, stable prices, and economic growth. So, sa full employment, it is an economic situation in which all available labor resources are being used in the most efficient way possible. So, kaning full employment, it embodies the highest amount of skilled and unskilled labor that can be employed within an economy at any given time. So, even if kuan ka, kanang you are professional and non-professional, gi-aim sa UK government nga kinanglan ang tanan ay trabaho para makakontribute sa economy, and that is one correlate with the political risk nga mo ni kinahanglan goal sa government nga need og full employment para ma-develop ang country and especially ang economy. So, ikaduha is the favorable balance of payments. So, it is the balance of payment is a measure of all the financial transactions flowing between one country and all other countries during a specific period, usually a quarter or a year. So, dinhi sa ta sa balance of payments. Ang balance of payments ngan gyud ni siya sa transaction sa usa ka country, specifically sa UK, kay UK man ang atong gihisgutan diri. So, ang UK government is, ang ilang balance of payments, naga-aim of favorable balance of payments. So, ang balance of payments ay mo tong export, the transaction of export and import of the goods and services. So, ang favorable, it means nga, mas gusto sa UK government, gi-aim nila nga ang economy is favorable balance of payment in which mas daghan ang or mas dako ang GDP kaysa sa GNP, in which kinahanglan isa ka country nga mag-focus sila or mas concerned sila sa GDP kaysa sa GNP. It's because sa specific diri sa favorable balance of payment nga mas daghan ang export kaysa sa import. So, which means nga, mas daghan ang GDP kaysa sa GNP. So, man ang generally niya nga sense diri sa favorable balance of payment. So, mas daghan ang, kung mas daghan ang atong gi-export, it means mas daghan pud ang gain nato nga madawat. So, dinhi sa balance of payment, dinhi ang record sa transaction of export and imports of all services and goods. So, ikatulo is the stable prices. So, ang stable prices, it is a price stability exists when average prices are constant over time or when they are rising at a very low, unpredictable rate. So, naatay duha ka klase sa stable prices, which is the price inflation and price deflation. Kaning duha ka kinds is nahisgutan na ni siya sa economic risk. gi-expound ni nila dito, pero nalang ko'y gamay nga ihatag para understanding about political risk. So kani siya maka-affect gyapon ni sa political risk or sa government nga aspect. It's because concern man ang government sa economy. So kung unsay naglihok sa ekonomiya o unsay mga pamaagi nga para palihokon ang ekonomiya, maepektuhan pud apil ang government kay especially sila ang in the first place sila ang naga-impose to para mahitabo ning ilang goals and aims, especially sa yuki nga government. So kaning stable prices kuan ni siya kanang condition ni siya kung kibali condition ni siya kung mutaas ba ang price or it means a price inflation or na ay price deflation in kanang naay mahitabo ning duha depende sa kanang kuan sa ekonomiya, sitwasyon sa ekonomiya. Like for example sa karon sa COVID nato, unsa may gipatupad ni Duterte nga kuan, daghan siya gipatupad na fiscal policy to kanang mitigate the risk sa economy. Like for example, daghay gipangtupad na mga act karon para kanang ma-constant gihapon ang dagan sa ekonomiya ba, in which gipaagi pud siya sa price inflation o katong magbaligya og mask nga mahal na ang presyo kaysa sa average nga price niya, katong normal gyud niya nga price nga wala pa nahitabo ang dilema. Pagabot sa dilema mo na ning price inflation o depende ang stable prices depende siya kung unsay situation sa ekonomiya. Okay, so ang ikaupat nga gi-aim sa UK government or labot sa ilang fiscal policy is the economic growth. Especially kani gyud ang pinaka sense sa goal sa tanan country, kaning economic growth. Economic growth is an increase in the production of economic goods and services compared from one period of time to another. It can be measured in nominal or real, adjusted for inflation terms. So kaning economic growth gi-expand na po ni sa economic risk. So mao nang nagay relationship ang economic ug ang political. It's because ang government ang nag-impose sa mga laws, sila ang nag-govern ana para ma-develop ang economy, na i-progress ang economy, unsa ang paglihok sa ekonomiya. So pinaka-basic na gyud nga i-aims gyud sa government ang economic growth. So diri sa UK, sa economic growth nila, mao lagi tong gi-aim nila nga mas dako ang ilang GDP kaysa sa GNP. Otherwise, dili man sa sense nga kinahanglan gyud gamayon na to ang GNP. In a sense lang, in the other sense lang nga dapat mas mulabaw gyud atong GDP. Kaya mas dako man atong income nga madawat sa country kung kita ang mag-export. Okay. So mao na to nga aning upat ka kuan objectives or goals sa UK government. Kuan siya kanang standard siya nga goals. It's because extended siya nga goals sa macroeconomics nga objectives. Kanang macroeconomics objectives na siya sa kanang normal nga fiscal policy ba nga gi-impose sa government. Tulo siya kabuok matong stable prices, economic growth, and balance of payment, favorable balance of payment. Kana gyud siya ang pinaka-basic nga macroeconomic goals or objectives. Pero ang UK, standard man ang ila, develop naman ang UK kay ang UK ang ika-6 na ika-6 na largest economy sa sa world. So siya ang ikaunom nga pinakadako nga ekonomiya sa kalibutan. So ang iyang isa sa gidugang niya sa iyang macroeconomics goals is the full employment nga wala sa uban country, nga dili na basta-basta nila na ma-aim kana ang objectives. So manay advantage pud sa UK. And then government strives to accomplish these aims by affecting total demand in the economy through the implementation of policies. So mauna to nga gipaningkamutan sa government nga kaning mga aims nila, kaning mga plano nila, mga goals nila dapat ma-effective siya, ma-impose siya sa country through the implementation of policies. So din hinata musulod na ang fiscal policy. So mao na to nga ang fiscal policy istoryahan na po siya sa economic risk nga relates to changes in taxation and government spending. It is the use of government spending and tax policies to influence economic conditions, especially macroeconomic conditions, including aggregate demand for goods and services, employment, inflation, and economic growth. So kaning fiscal policy mo na ning kanang instrument ni siya nga policy para mapalambo pinakasin sa palambo ang ekonomiya. So unsaon man in the first place unsa man pag unsay process ang pangutana ani unsay process. So para makatabang ang gobyerno sa ekonomiya through taxation for any fund. So sa tax na ay fund mao na tong mugawas na layon ang government spending sa paggasto na sa gobyerno, pag-disseminate na sa funds para sa mga agency o tanan pang kinahanglanon sa country. So mao na ang process sa fiscal policy. Pwede pud na siya ma-change in economic situation. Depende siya sa unsay situation sa economy kaning fiscal policy. So maglibot ra ni siya diri sa kuan kanang through implementation of taxation and government spending. And then mo na ni ang government spending, it includes social security, health, education, defense, public order and safety, housing and community amenities, transportation and communication. So mo na ni sa government spending kung gibudget pod sa gobyerno kung unsaon nila paggasto ang funds gikan sa buwis sa tao. So nung i-disseminate po na nila sa mga agencies na naman na sa atong GAM nga kung unsaon pag-disseminate government spending na scope na sa government spending, and it is one correlate with political risk. Kaya ang gobyerno man mismo sila man mismo ang magplano ani kung unsaon unsaon nila paglihok ni unsay process ani. So pag disseminate na nila ani government spending dito sa health, education, tanan mga gastuhanan. So in national income accounting, when the government acquires goods and services for current use to directly satisfy the individual or collective needs and requirements of the community, it is classified as government final consumption spending. When the government acquires goods and services for future use, it is classified as government investment. This includes public consumption and public investment and transfer payments consisting of income transfers. So, sa national income accounting, kung ang gobyerno mag-acquire sila og goods and services for the current use, immediate use, para kanang COVID lagi karon na mag-acquire ng goods and services for the immediate use, nagka-indicate na siya, makclassified na siya as government final consumption spending. So makagit sa sa idea sa government final consumption spending, which is na-change na ang fiscal policy. Kibali mao ni ang fiscal policy sa niagi nga tuig hingabot dayon ang COVID. So gibag-o ang fiscal policy. Giunsa pagbag-o sa fiscal policy? Gibag-o ang tax. Gibag-o ang taxation, pag-impose sa taxation, bag-o pud ang pagbudget sa gobyerno manaw through government spending. So government final consumption ang tawag ana kung na-change na. Okay, na-change na ang fiscal policy. So, kung ang government acquires goods and services for future use, gi-indicates na gitawag na siya o government investment. So diri na to sa sources of government spending. Government spending is financed primarily through two sources. Mao na tong tax and government borrowings. Mao na tong akong gi-expound gaina, which is tax collections by the government. Taxes can be direct, indirect, and progressive. So ang direct, taken directly from income. Ang indirect, place goods and services such as VAT. Tako laman ni nato sa tax. And then progressive, such as taking a higher proportion of income as income arises. And then number 2, government borrowings. The government mainly gets funds to spend in the economy through revenues it earns. However, when revenue is insufficient to pay for the expenditure, it resorts to borrowing. No? So borrowing can be short-term or long-term and involves selling government bonds or bills. Treasury bills are also issued into the money markets to help raise short-term cash. So natay two types of borrowing money from its own citizens and borrowing money from foreigners. And in types of spending, current spending and capital spending. Current spending, these are for the short term and include expenditure on wages and raw materials, while capital spending, these are for the long term and do not need to be renewed each year, also called social capital. This includes spending on physical assets like roads, bridges, hospital buildings, and equipment. So, ang current spending, in short-term silang expenditures. Ang capital spending, mga investments. So, di rin na ta sa pressure groups. So, by the way, ang pinakasummary sa UK Fiscal nga policy is maotong unsay pinaupat nila ka goals, and then aho ranggi breakdown kung unsa ang kanang naa sa sulod sa fiscal policy, and then mao na to dayon nga ang manang ang UK ang gibest example po dire kay developed country man sila, isa man sila sa pinakadako nga ekonomiya nga isa pud sila sa mga fokusan, and it relates to political risk because ang government mismo maayo ang ilang pagpatupad sa mga balaod, pag-impose nila og fiscal policy and other policies, maayo ang ilang pagdala sa ekonomiya. Mo nang isa siya sa na example as a political risk. So sa pressure groups, these are organized groups of people with similar interests who attempt to influence others, notably governments and large businesses. They range in size from international organizations such as Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, and Amnesty International to small community groups concerned only with local matters who will exist just for the life of one particular issue. So kaning pressure groups, pinaka best example is the secret society. Okay? So ang pressure group daw, a pressure group success largely depends on the level of financial, public, and political support, as well as on the organizational ability of the group itself, depending on the planned business investment in terms of whether it is unique or following a well-worn path. Reaction from the more well-worn pressure groups can be predicted to a degree. However, it is the groups that form just to oppose or restrict a single development that can be harder or impossible to predict. So kaning pressure groups, isa po ni siya political risk because kanang pwede ni siya makagain og interes sa public. Pwede niya makuha ang ma-influence mo ganitong pinaka base niya nga sense is ma-influensyahan niya ang public. So political risk siya, it's because dako siya nga organization siya with the people inside nga pareha sila interest, like for example anti-Duterte or pro-Duterte. So na sila itagsa-tagsaan nga organization, and this organization can or may affect the government implementation, government laws. This organization may affect, and it may be the secret society or the NPA, which is the very kuana ni sila nga mga organizations, kanang mga bagtik na ni sila nga organization na lisod na ni sila tanggalon sa gobyerno. Munang isa siya ang pressure groups, munang gitawag siya pressure groups, it's because kanang mo average bitaw siya sa government. Ang kuan sa murag ang authority and power of the government murag mo inline da ang pressure groups ana. Murag kung pwede pa gani, kung dili pa lang kusog ang government nga control and everything nga ilang gihimo sa ekonomiya, pwede malabuan sa pressure groups ang government through organizations. Buo na sila organizations. Pinaka the best na example sa ato diri is katong akong na-mention beforehand or katong mga preceding na kong mention gaina sa example nako sa pressure groups. So kani sila magdepende lagi pod sa level of financial, public and political support. Pero kay nabayay ang pressure group nagdepende sila sa financial, public and political support nga it means naani sila'y head. So kasagaran ang bilong sa pressure groups mga intel. It means intel, dili lang na sila basta-basta nga mga tao, dili na sila ordinary people lang nga kanang ordinary people. How we predict ordinary people. Dili lang ni sila basta-basta nga ordinary people. They create an organization for a purpose. Labi na ang organization kasagaran sa pressure groups is to down the government or make it up or kanang tabangan ang gobyerno nga mulambo or tabangan ang gobyerno nga kanang i-down ang ekonomiya. Duha ra man ay padulungan, i-down ang ekonomiya or palambuon ang ekonomiya. Kani nga pressure groups depende ni sila kung unsay ilang objectives, vision and mission pod sa ilang organizations nga pinaka the best pod ni one of the factors pod ni siya nga maka-affect or correlate with the political risk. So, ang terrorism and blackmail. So, food and drink, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, and tobacco products are susceptible to product contamination, both accidental and by deliberate interference through malice or for financial or political gain. Such incidents are increasingly common, and when they occur, they attract media attention that can have a disastrous impact on the product or brand name. So companies can incur significant cost from recalling and replacing the damaged product through loss of sales, from advertising cost to regain the public's confidence, and from rehabilitating the brand name. Mobile and permanent investments located in emerging markets are increasingly vulnerable to terrorist attacks, war, or other forms of politically motivated violence, resulting in physical damage to these assets. Outbreaks of military conflict are occurring on a more frequent basis, not only in less developed countries but also in industrialized nations. Along with more prevalent incidents of war and civil war, acts of terrorism are also on the rise, or dako siyang impact, with targets more often on transportation system or in the corporate sector than in military or diplomatic locations. So, kaning terrorism and blackmail, isa po ni siya sa political risk. It's because isa po ni sila sa kanang pwede po ni sila makagain og financial or political gain nga pwede nila kanang ma-attract nila ang media attention ba. Kuan po ni siya kanang relate ra po ni siya sa pressure groups. Murag pressure groups na ni siya kanang kuan na ni kanang specification of pressure groups, which is the terrorism and blackmail. No, kay kaning duha pinaka kuan po ni sila, disastrous sila nga kanang mga panghitabo, like for example dako siyag impact sa ekonomiya, like kanang kuan may mga incidents nga dauton ang mga produkto, like for example sa proceeding nga akong gibasa is kanang makaapekto siya sa produkto, dauton nila ang produkto, dauton nila ang produkto, like kanang maghatag silang feedback nga ingani ang produkto, tas willingly nga ang isa ka product is kanang sikat or demand ang isa ka product, or in demand siya nya halinon unya sikat lagi or siyang number 1 the spot nga brand, and then here comes the blackmail or terrorism nga maghatag dig feedback nga ingani ang product maghatag og negative feedback. So unsay mahitabo man ana sa company, so ang company dako pug epektuhan na sa company, and then dako og epektuhan na sa company nga which is it's either na sila loss of sales, as what I've said earlier, na sila loss of sales, or daghan na sila kanang mga dili ma-regain ang confidence sa public confidence. It's because nanay negative nga feedback, and then kaning negative feedback it may occur sa terrorism. Wala ginang nabinaog ka ng fake news kana, terrorism po ng fake news and blackmail, kauban na silang duha. Kay kani manggong terrorism blackmail dali ra gyud ni siya ma-disseminate, and then dali ra pud siya makabuhat og ingani nga acts through online sensation. Like for example lagi kanang labi na sa online sales nya mga yung feedback ang company, o pwede man mo kamo nga kamo organization kani ang inyong i-feedback, o unya kay fake news man di ay to, and then you don't know the real impact on the company. So dili man na siya mahug nga terrorism kay na may uban nga kanang dili sila organization, kanang iyahay lang gyud sila kanang from other sources ba, pero ang ilang point is to down the product, to give a low quality of the product, a low effectiveness of the product. So it may cause matawag na siya nga terrorism and the blackmail in the sense of a company. Kay kanang mag-oppose man siya kung kibali ikaw na nga brand, ikaw nga company lambo na ka pre nang ibig sabihin o pinakadako nga na kumpanya sa example diri sa ato sa Pilipinas, mangita gyud nagway ng mga tao nga oppose gyud ana nga corporation na gusto gyud nila ibagsak na through kanina ngita na silang bangag, and then it may indicate that there is terrorism behind and blackmail. Kung anhi pud ta sa kanang pisikalan jud na terrorism kadto nang anti-military o kana nang na civil war, kanang nanay mga gira-gira kana terrorism gyapon na, pero lahi na siya nga aspect sa terrorism. Ang terrorism nga pasabot sa political risk kana maka-affect sa economy and labi na sa business. Ang business din habay magkuha og ang magikan ang pinakadako nga tax sa business, sa dagko nga mga business corporation din habay magikan ang pinakadako nga tax. So kung mapektuhan ang business, kung mapektuhan ang pinakadako nga business, mapektuhan pud, it may affect the economy. Kay kibali sila man ang number 1 nga hatag og income. It is not an income. Ay kibali sila makadugang og fund sa kaban ng bayan. So, kaning terrorism, kung sa sense nga political risk, mo to akong giingon gaina, pero kaning lahi po ning terrorism, mabot pasabot anang kanang kuan, anti-government na terrorism, or kanang anti-military. Ang para sa Mindanao, o terrorism man na sila. Kanang nahitabo sa Mindanao, indicate man po na siya sa terrorism and other factors nag-indicate of terrorism.
Responding to political risk. So first step in responding is assessing political risk factors. So, in practice, it usually comes into play when a business is considering activities in other countries. Pero ang kani pong pag-assess nato sa political risk is ang kuan pa ni siya, ma-apply po ni siya kung maghimo ra ta diri og business activity domestically. So, ang pag-assess sa political risk, ang mga company is mag-hire sila og mga professional which is called political risk analyst who identify political risk in their variables, assess their significance and relationship between them, and make recommendation regarding the management and mitigation of political risk. So, ang kaning analyst is nag-use of both quantitative o qualitative analysis. So, ang sa quantitative model purport to assess various indexes such as political stability based on nominal, ordinal, or interval variables. Ang kani pong political stability according to Wagner na when assessing political stability, the focus should be on the legitimacy of state authority, the ability of that authority to impose and enforce decrees, and the level of corruption that pervades the system of authority, as well as the degree of political fractionalization that is present. So, sa qualitative techniques are judgmental forecasting. For example, the so-called Delphi method, which is the accumulation of expert opinions. Informal brainstorming between experts is also used, especially when time is of the essence. So, ang political risk manggod is not more on data siya kay political risk is not based sa mga kanang dagan sa mga sa economy. Kani siya mabag-o ning arise ning political risk tungod sa tao po niya. Di ba yan nato matag-an ang mga tao. So, mag-forecast lang ta, dapat mag-aware ta kung unsay nahitabo sa sa political sa isa ka country o kinsa po nang atong danan sa isa ka country. So, ang political risk analysis aims to provide insight into areas of the political process in which a business needs to intervene if it wants to change the business environment, mitigate its potential risk, or maximize its opportunities. The second response to political risk is prioritizing political risk factors. After assessing kung unsa tong nakita nato ng mga risk, ato silang i-prioritize kung kinsa jud to ang pinaka dapat unahon. Since ang resources nato is dili man siya unlimited, limited naman siya. So unahon jud nato ang pinaka-importante. Political risk can be prioritized so that management energy is used in the most efficient way. So last response is improving relative bargaining power. So ang pag-improve sa bargaining power sa isa ka business is kung ang iyang business is kanabitang mo integrate na jud siya sa isa ka economy, murag part na jud siya sa country bitaw, like sa kadtong Disney na pag adto nila dito sa China is imbis na katong typical nila na costume ang ilang suoton, ang ilang mga dresses sa ilang mga characters nila is katong mga traditional na mga dresses sa mga Chinese. So dapat yun mo integrate yun ta kung asa ta na country mo mo himog activity in business. So there are approaches that businesses may use to ensure that this risk is minimized and appropriately assigned include the following. The first is undertaking proper planning and due diligence. So ang pinaka-primero mo jud ani na ma-mitigate nato ang risk is na jud type plano insakto. Dili nato siya dali-dalion ato jud ihan ay ang mga dapat nato ihan ay sa atong pagplano dapat dito madali-dali kay og natoy ma-miss gali na dako na kana siyang risk o dako po na siyang effect po sa atong business negatively. So second is investing in projects or entering into contracts where the host government has adopted policies that encourage private sector involvement as well as where the host government has clear and unambiguous statement of the government support for the type of investment being made. So, kung as an foreign investor po ta, kung investa sa laing country, tanawon po nato na ang atong gi-investa na company is gisuportaan po to sa gobyerno dito dito sa host government kay pareha diri sa Philippines na kintay og kwanta porenta nya mainvesta diri sa Philippines nya mainvesta dito sa kintay sa mga mining companies na kay bobeta na diri sa Pilipinas sa pagkakuan ni Duterte is ang mga mining gipahugtan ba siya daghan ba nag-shutdown na mga mining companies tungod kay gipahugtan ang mga laws unya murag gitutukan jud sa government na ang environmental na epekto sa mga mining mo nang daghan kayo ng nirado niya murag kita as an investor tanawon po nato na kung unsa tong wala gisuportaan sa government na mga businesses dito jud ta sa ilang gipang suportaan. So next is obtaining insurance against political risk and entering into hedging contracts to protect themselves against fluctuation in interest rates and currency exchange rates. So ang hedging contracts mura gyapon ni siya insurance. So the best way to understand hedging is to think of it as a form of insurance. When people decide to hedge, they are insuring themselves against a negative event's impact on their finances. This doesn't mean prevent all negative events from happening. However, if a negative event does happen and you're properly hedged, the impact of the event is reduced. Pero o ma-reduce pod ang kaning impact kita gi-reduce nato ang risk. So mura na po nato siya gi-reduce pod ang potential nato na profit kay bawo na beta na higher na risk, higher pod ang potential profit. Kung lower risk, lower pod ang potential na profit. So diri sa hedging kay gi-reduce man nato ang risk, so ma-reduce pod ang atong potential na profit na sa hedging. So the next approach is creating a risk-friendly investment environment by establishing a good relationship with the workforce. And next is incorporating a strong arbitration language into contracts to address labor disputes. So as a foreign business company, gina-encourage sila na sa ilang contracts sa ilang mga labors kay nadyo nakabutang na arbitration clause which require na sa mga laborers sa kung unsa ilang mga disputes arising from under or related to the contract is settled na dito sa company. Dito rin, adi man ingon sa company kay na may mga arbitrators na neutral sa company o dito po sa nag-file o disputes. So, ang arbitration is an out-of-court proceeding in which a neutral third party called an arbitrator. Moto siya mura siya mediator ang arbitrator. So, ang arbitrator hears evidence and then makes binding decision. Kay binding siya kay nanaman dito siya sa contract na may arbitration clause na nag-require sa mga employee kung na sila disputes dito na sila dili sila mo file ura-urada din dito sa court. So ang arbitration is usually faster, simpler, more efficient and more flexible for schedule than litigation. And the next approach is enhancing on-site security to protect against terrorist attacks. So, ang kani as a foreign na company, dili punta kana bitang kung na mga terrorist na mo anak sa tong company, di po nato siya suportaan kay para diri sa Pilipinas sa Del Monte na company na naay mo anak sa ila na mga mga NPA na mangayo sila o mga kanay kana ilang mga tax. So, ang Del Monte Company, dili din sila muhatag. So, despite na muhatag sila sa mga NPA, ang katong ihatag nila sa NPA, ihatag nila dito sa mga Philippine Army or sa mga sa Philippine Police. Manang ilang i-enhance ang ilang on-site security against sa terrorist attack para maprotektahan po sila permi. And the last approach and the most important is being attuned to what is happening in your host country. Kung asa ka na country, dapat yun updated ka sa mga nahitabo. As an investor po, labi na sa as an investor na dapat yun mga news updated yun ka ana pareha dito sa nahitabo sa US na si Trump is hapit na siya pildi niya ang iyang mga supporters na mga entrepreneurs kay na hulga na ilang dili sila mag-pay og tax. So meaning og di sila mag-pay og tax, ilang dili sila maghimo og business. Dili nila ipadayon ang business o dili maipadayon ang business, walay income ang government nya dili mo dagan ang economy. Sumudaw jud ang economy kay wala may mga kuan. Dapat jud updated ta na o kanos ata mo invest asa to invest o kanos ana to kuhaon atong investment. So that's all. Thank you.